Hello, I'm Beth Joey and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, welcome. This is the channel where I paint my face, turn my camera on and talk about some books. I'm just gonna say quick apologies in advance. I caught a chest infection, I think, from my sister, so I'm sounding a bit husky, a bit nasally, a bit gross today. So we're moving on past it. We got a cough and splutter, gonna sneeze. It's a thing. So has anybody caught season 2 of Bridgerton lately? I just watched the first 3 episodes and I'm not 100% buying the chemistry and the romance between Anthony and Miss Sharma, whose name is escaping me, Kate. There's this scene involving a bee which just felt very, very awkward to me between Kate and Anthony, not the one between Anthony and his father. So I understand like the emotion and everything behind that, but I didn't, I was sitting there like, is this supposed to be like heart racing? Let me know down below if you've watched season 2 of Bridgerton. I'll have probably finished it by the time I upload this video, so I want to know all your lovely thoughts in the comments down below. Back to the bookish content. I have read another 5 books since my last 5 book reading update, so today I'm just going to run you through what those were. You guys are going to have to forgive me 2 things very quickly. One, because I'm sick, my brain is dead, so when it comes to reciting what these books are about, there's just nothing going on up here. So I am just going to be reading the blurbs from Goodreads. And my second thing that you're going to have to forgive me for is I actually returned 4 out of 5 of these books to the library recently, so I don't actually have the hard copies of any of them except for 1. So yeah, I'm sorry, I usually wouldn't be quite so disorganized. I'm sick, I didn't plan, yeah, it's a whole thing. The first book in this video is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, which I gave 4 stars. I really loved this book. And as for the blurb, on Goodreads it says, "A world divided, a queendom without an heir, an ancient enemy awakens. The house of Barathnet has ruled Innis for 1,000 years. Still unwed, Queen Sabran IX must conceive a daughter to protect her realm from destruction, but assassins are getting closer to her door. Ead Dunyan is an outsider at court. Though she has risen to the position of lady-in-waiting, she is loyal to a hidden society of mages. Ead keeps a watchful eye on Sabran, secretly protecting her with forbidden magic. Across the Dark Sea, Tanae has trained to be a dragon rider since she was a child, but is forced to make a choice that could see her life unravel. Meanwhile, the divided East and West refuse to parley, and forces of chaos are rising from their sleep." As for my thoughts, the first thing that I noted was just it is such a complex and incredible and intricate world to dive into, and the cast of characters was probably the largest that I've ever read from, especially because there were quite a few perspectives to follow. But because it was about 800 pages long, you still had plenty of time to really fall in love with them and get really super invested in their story, and when certain things would happen to them, it would break your heart, and then when other things would happen, you just feel with joy, and it was really good. I loved how this traditional power structure was sort of flipped on its head in that queens were the sort of figures of power rather than kings, but then the interesting sort of element of that was that, you know, women are still the ones that give birth, so you had that element of she's in power and she's got all the control and all the power and everything, but she still has this duty to family and everything, and so she still must marry. So it had a lot of parallels with what I imagine Queen Elizabeth must have gone through in terms of Sabran IX. The focus of this book was definitely world, magic, and character building rather than being particularly plot driven, in my opinion, so that made it quite slow to read at times. But it was definitely still really enjoyable, so I gave it 4 stars like I said, and I would recommend to anyone who is willing to dive into a beast of a fantasy, pick this one up because it's such a good read, good sapphic romance, incredible like star-crossed lovers element as well. It's amazing. The next book that I read was Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, which I gave 3 stars. The Goodreads blurb says, "First son Alex Claremont Diaz is the closest thing to a prince this side of the Atlantic. With his intrepid sister and the Veep's genius granddaughter, they're the White House trio, a beautiful millennial marketing strategy for his mother, President Ellen Claremont. International socialite duties do have downsides, namely when photos of a confrontation with his longtime nemesis Prince Henry at a royal wedding leak to the tabloids and threaten American/British relations. The plan for damage control, staging a fake friendship between the first son and the prince. As President Claremont kicks off her re-election bid, Alex finds himself hurtling into a secret relationship with Henry that could derail the campaign and upend 2 nations. What is worth the sacrifice? How do you do all the good you can do? And most importantly, how will history remember you? Now, the reason why I gave this book 3 stars is because I didn't super buy the romance between Alex and Henry. There were quite a few issues I had with it. Firstly, I did appreciate, for one, that the enemies to lovers side of things, because it very much was clear that they did not like each other at the very beginning of the book. But unfortunately, that sort of enemies side of things did filter into their relationship in a way, in that Alex would blatantly like insult Henry while they were, you know, getting jiggy with it, and it was just, I don't understand how that's a turn on. It was so weird to read, being like, oh, you're disgusting, I hate you, and Henry's like, oh, tell me more, and it's like, why? Secondly, I really didn't like the character of Alex for the majority of the first half of the book. I found him really self-centered, really self-important, self-indulgent. Just everything was about Alex, and everybody would point it out to him over and over again that he was just so self-indulgent. And he just was like, yeah, that's because I'm amazing and you can't do better than me and I'm smarter than you and all this sort of stuff. I'm going to be the president one day. And you just look at him and you're like, mate, like, stop, you're not as cool as you think you are. But I did really like that Henry would make Alex aware of his own self-importance and really call him out on it in the quippy banter that they had going back and forth. And as they sort of started to become friends, I sort of bought the friendship a bit more and I began to buy the relationship a bit more. And yes, it moved quite quickly, but it was, I liked that Henry challenged Alex and was like, dude, like, you're not the best thing since sliced bread. Your mother's the first female president. She's also a single mother, and she's also, I think she's Latina, so it's like, she's the coolest thing. You're just like her son. But as I got through the rest of the book and I started to buy into the romance a bit more, I really appreciated the sort of other elements that it explored, like the sort of pressure of being in the royal family and then the first family. I like that Casey McQuiston didn't go down that sort of romanticized route that I think a lot of romantic books do go down, which is, you know, everything's lovely, you've got all this power, you've got all these opportunities, you can go on all these cool dates. It was more like, we have to actually cover this up because we are a gay couple in these big prominent families, especially in the royal family, where being gay I think would be just a complete no-go. But all that is just to say I gave the book 3 stars. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, there were just a few issues that I had with it. I loved the romance towards the end, but some of the building the romance things were a bit weird, and then some of the characters really just wound me up the wrong way. The next book that I'm going to mention is definitely on a more serious note, and I did not rate this book because it felt wrong to rate it. It felt just, you can't rate this kind of book. On Goodreads I did give it 5 stars just because I didn't want to give it a bad rating. I still think it's an incredibly important book and I want its rating on Goodreads to be boosted up so that it gets a bit more recognition. But in terms of my own like records, I didn't rate it. And that book is Know My Name by Shannon Miller. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the ins and outs of this book because it's a massive trigger warning for sexual assault, for mental health. So I don't want to go into the big bio, but essentially what it is about is Shannon Miller is the survivor of the sexual assault case in Stanford. I believe it was in 2016 around that time. She led the case against Brock Turner, and for the entire time that she was involved, she was under the name Emily Doe, I think. She didn't release her name publicly. And that was just not only to protect herself, but to also use as a coping mechanism to remove herself from it. There were elements in this book where she would go, you know, oh no, that's Emily. Like, I'm Chanel, that's Emily. And she would almost like change into this other person every time she had to go to court, and then change back into herself when she was in her own life and everything. But yeah, it's an incredibly fascinating book. I wouldn't say I enjoyed reading it, but it was one of those things that I think a lot of people should read because it was her chance to come out and be like, look, you've heard 1,000,001 things about me in the press. They're horrible, horrible things. You've heard people doubt me. You've heard people say I'd never let my daughter do that, but here's my story. I'm owning it. This is who I am. And frankly, she is the most incredible, incredible writer. The way that she weaves in moments from her past and makes them relevant to the moment in the present in the story that she's talking to the reader about is incredible, and it gives you so much context about her and about why she reacted in the ways that she did. I didn't rate this book, but if I had to sort of give it a rating in order to make people read it, it would be 100% 5 stars because I think it's so important and it's so interesting and it's such an impactful book, and it teaches you so much about trauma and about experiencing something like what Chanel experienced, and also placing it in the context of you know, other situations, and realizing how much of like a systemic issue the inequality that women in these cases face, and the judgment they face, and the victim blaming. So yeah, I think everybody should read it. But moving on to lighter notes, the next book that I read was Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire, which is the first book in the Wayward Children series. I have just got the Goodreads profile up again, and the blurb says, Eleanor West's home for wayward children, no solicitations, no visitors, no quests. Children have always disappeared under the right conditions, slipping through the shadows under a bed or at the back of a wardrobe, tumbling down rabbit holes and into old wells, and emerging somewhere else. But magical lands have little need for used-up miracle children. Nancy tumbled once, but now she's back. The things she's experienced, they change a person. The children under Miss West's care understand all too well, and each of them is seeking a way back to their own fantasy world. But Nancy's arrival marks a change at the home. There's a darkness just around each corner, and when tragedy strikes up, it's up to Nancy and her newfound schoolmates to get to the heart of the matter, no matter the cost. This book was incredibly Alice in Wonderland-esque. It was very lyrical, it was very magical, and I gave it 3 stars. It was one of those books where I don't think you're supposed to come out of it really fully understanding what you've just read, and it is like a little baby of a book as well, so it's a super quick read. The book itself, I would have to say, was quite unexpected, just because I expected all of the kids at the school to be kids. I expected them to be children, quite young, but then the language that they would use was like, it just threw me out completely, where I was like, how old are these people actually? Because, you know, one of the characters would talk quite openly about masturbation, and then another character would talk quite openly about, you know, how their world involved a lot of death, and then the descriptions of the murders were really gruesome. So I was completely thrown out, because I was like, went into this book thinking maybe it's like middle grade, like, or early YA, but I definitely wouldn't consider it that, having actually read it. Unfortunately, the fact that I did spend the majority of the book really confused and not knowing fully what was happening, or how all the worlds were connected and how everything came together, meant that I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. So that did lead to the 3-star rating, because I was just so confused. So I really do hope that it's explained a little bit more clearly as the series goes on. I'm told book 3 is when you get a lot of explanation, so I'm hoping that I can look forward to that in the future. And the very last book is the one that I actually have on me, because I only just finished reading it, and this is A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. It is the first book in the Veronica Speedwell Mysteries series. I believe they do sort of like follow on from each other, but they're all their own sort of individual mystery, so you don't really need to read them in order, I think. I don't know, but I'm going to read them in order. The blurb says, after burying her spinster aunt, the orphan Veronica Speedwell intends to resume her world travels in pursuit of scientific inquiry and the occasional romantic dalliance. As familiar with hunting butterflies as she is fending off admirers, Veronica wields her butterfly net and a sharpened hat pin with equal aplomb. But fate has other plans, as Veronica discovers when she thwarts her own abduction with the help of an enigmatic German baron with ties to her mysterious past. The baron offers her sanctuary in the care of his friend, Stoker, a reclusive natural historian as intriguing as he is bad-tempered. But before the baron can reveal his secrets, he is found murdered. Veronica and Stoker are forced to go on the run, wary partners in search of the villainous truth. And this book was fascinating, I have to say, because it was quite like tongue-in-cheek and quite humorous in terms of language style, and then obviously it's set in the sort of Regency era, so you're reading in that sort of dated or older language style, but then the beliefs of some of the characters and the actions of some of the characters I think are quite modern. So for example, Veronica Speedwell herself is quite flirtatious. She has had a number of dalliances, shall we say, with men throughout the years, and that is definitely not something that would be acceptable in this time. She is also a female scientist, which again, not acceptable in this time. So there's quite a few like modern elements thrown in there, as well as Stoker being, I think, like a pretty good feminist. It was probably the most historically inaccurate book that I've ever read, especially as it related to the big twist towards the end. It had the historian in me kind of cringing a little bit, because I was like, oh, there's no way that happened. There is no way that's even feasible. But obviously when you set books in a sort of historical context, you have to sort of toe the line between accuracy and what you want your book to sort of go down, you know, the narrative plot. I really did love the sort of grumpy sunshine interactions between Veronica and Stoker. They were super funny to watch, and their relationship was just really entertaining. So for that front, I loved this book. But I do find myself with very little to say about the plot, because I think the book was mostly driven by the characters and their interactions with each other and the world building even, and there just wasn't a heap going on all the time. So I give this book 4 stars, and I'm super excited to get into the rest of the series because I know I'm gonna love it. I know it's gonna be humorous and funny and fun and cheeky and all that sort of thing. So yeah, can't wait to pick the rest up. So those are the 5 most recent books that I have read. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, loved them, hated them, all that sort of thing. Let me know your thoughts obviously as well on Bridgerton season 2 if you have watched it, if you've loved it. I'm a little bit let down by it at the moment because I'm not fully buying the chemistry between Anthony and Kate, but we'll see how the rest of the season goes. I have to wait till Ben gets back from his day out before I can watch it, because he's like, I'm fully like invested in this now, I want to watch it. So I can't watch it on my own as much as I want to. As always, like, subscribe and hit that notification bell to be notified when I release new content, and I will see you lovely people in my next video. Bye!